special interviews, highlights, and live broadcasts from ICT's annual international conference.
Dan Diker here in the middle of all the action at the 15th Annual World Summit on Counterterrorism at the Interdisciplinary Center Herzliya. Of course, it's the International Institute for Counterterrorism that has been the long-time director, sponsor, visionary behind this, and that sort of Professor Boaz Ganor has succeeded in bringing the top executives and authorities on international terrorism, counterterrorism, right here to IDC to ICT and the IDC Herzliya, and certainly today is no exception. I'm most delighted to welcome the Right Honorable Baroness Pauline Neville-Jones, who was the former minister for state security for Prime Minister Cameron, and now running their cyber, responsible for the cyber activity of the United Kingdom in the current government. And goodness gracious, jihad in the Europeans, Baroness, we really face what seems to be an intensifying phenomenon of European nationals flowing into Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, more correctly, and coming back and posing a great threat to the United Kingdom and other neighbors.
Well, certainly the numbers going in are cause of real preoccupation. The current figure for the UK is about 700. Not as great as some countries, but I mean a very sizable number of people. I think the flow is steady rather than actually accelerating. Nevertheless, the target of the policy obviously is to get that down. And we faced, I think, really by ideological recruitment. This is the appeal conducted very largely through social media to young, impressionable people who are tempted by the vision of either, some of them blood and gore. They actually have the thrill of what I'm going to describe as extremely brutal.
Yeah. Can you just come a little bit towards the microphone,
right,
so the whole world can hear
right.
your wisdom?
And young women who are being tempted by a very false utopia. One of the newer phenomena is the recruitment of women to go and join and be, in effect, slaves to these
That would be
men.
sexual slavery by
Absolutely.
women.
Absolutely, yeah.
What kind of a challenge does that place on the security apparatus of the United Kingdom in the context of the fact that, certainly from an Israeli point of view, we've seen that the United Kingdom traditionally has been quite liberal in who is able to come into the United Kingdom, live his or her life as a responsible a citizen of the UK, and it seems that again, it's the perception from here that has created a real serious security challenge.
Well, you used a word that I regard as being very important, or I was called responsible. We have certainly in the past let in people whom, with the wisdom of hindsight, we should not have. And that goes right back to the 80s. When we pursued a policy of quite excessive liberalism, and indeed it was a source of controversy inside government. And I remember myself, then as a civil servant in the Foreign Office, objecting to the policies being pursued by the Home Office in this respect. So it's not new, and it's never been without argument. We landed ourselves with a serious problem with people who felt that there was no let or hindrance on any kind of preaching that they did, and so we've had people in our midst who have preached violence. We've changed the law.
How does the law read today? What is the legality today?
You are not now permitted to preach for violence. You are not allowed to preach that murder is okay. You are not allowed to preach. You're not allowed to actually preach hate either. So there are a number of criteria that have been introduced into what is permissible in public, and it's being enforced. And people do get arrested, and they do get a sentence. Is this something that in a liberal and a peaceful society you would want to have to do? No. Is it necessary? Absolutely. You have to, and what's more, we have expelled those that we can expel, who are not UK citizens. And we're clamping down on those who are, because there is no doubt that there is clear evidence that these people have succeeded in recruiting. So no, this is a serious issue, and it has to be taken seriously. But that's only one, that's only one aspect.
Yes.
And I think that the phenomenon we face at the moment with these young people, some of them certainly are influenced by hate speech and by public meetings. But the really novel and dangerous feature of the scene is the one-to-one recruitment through the social media. They study these young people. They investigate them. ISIS are extremely sophisticated. They investigate the social media. They hunt for individuals whom they think might be suitable candidates for their propaganda. They get in touch with them. They conduct a dialogue. They tempt them in. They coax them in. There's an exchange of views, and depending on what they find, they adapt their persona at the other end to tempt them to come. It's very, very sophisticated, insidious, subversive stuff. Very hard to deal with. We need the help of the owners of social media. Now, one of the problems that the United Kingdom faces is that these companies are not in the UK. We don't have jurisdiction over them. We can't require them to do things. If they were, we would. As it is, we need to rely on international cooperation, actually to get hold of some of that material that we need for purposes of prosecution. The methodology that is available at the moment for serving of international warrants is extremely cumbersome. We need rapid mutual legal assistance procedures actually to help each other. And it's an area where the law does need to operate and where we do need to do something. Having said all that, actually what we have to do, it's essentially a social thing at the end of the day. We have to have a proper and powerful counter-narrative. We find in the UK that the most powerful messages are delivered by ex-jihadis, because they are the people who can speak with authority to those who are tempted. Don't do this. It's a bad idea. The following happened to me. And it's that kind of counter-narrative that is really the most powerful. But you can see that there are small numbers of people who do this. We can put things onto YouTube. We can scale up, and we can carry the message. But in the end, very often, what you need is a one-to-one session. So this is tough stuff. Lying behind that, of course, is the social context in which people live, and we have to do more. One of the things that we have learnt the hard way, I think, in the UK, is that we have to do more, as the US does, actually creating cohesive society, building the nation, getting the sense of single unity, single values, and single loyalties. I'm in favour of doing all of these things. I do not believe that we can any longer say to ourselves as Brits, we're a nice, tolerant society, people who come here will settle down and imbibe our values. It's clearly not the case. There are all sorts of hostile forces operating on people. We've got to do the building ourselves.
Well, in that context, Baroness, one looks at the insistence by Muslim clerics on the imposition of Sharia law in parts of the UK. And one looks at this today with increasing concern in the context of what you described, which is essentially really changing, what's the counter-narrative, political warfare of the enemy in the old Soviet-US context. How much can the UK impose or culture or illegalize, to brand illegal the imposition of Sharia law inside the sovereign borders of the UK?
Well, if you ask me my personal opinion,
I'm asking your personal opinion.
The last thing I want to see is a dual legal system in the UK. The government has just announced a quotes review of the way in which Sharia law is being introduced by custom. What tends to happen is that the couple concerned, it's usually in the area of family law, but of course family law is very important in all of this, and all the things about the women only getting a portion of the dowry and all the inequalities operate. But what tends to happen is that the couple will go before a Sharia court and will accept a settlement from the so-called Sharia judge. I don't know what the outcome of that is going to be. I'm very clear, that we've got to stop this. that people must be subject to the secular law of the country, and that they will, if they wish to marry, it should be according to UK law, and if they wish to divorce, it should be according to UK law. And I think that will be the widespread opinion. So I think that's another area where this notion that somehow it's possible to run a separate society with separate legal systems, separate mores, because the legal system perpetuates social structures of a kind which are wholly antithetic to equality, to diversity, to gender equality, to upward mobility, all of those things that you want to see, in a thriving democracy. So I regard this as an important issue, and the fact that the government has said we're going to look at this, I think it means we're going to look at this, and we're going to see what we can do about stopping it.
Well, let's talk about protecting democracy, but having to do it from afar by sending servicemen and women to the Middle East. I know that Prime Minister Cameron has taken quite a leadership position in committing servicemen and women to areas of conflict. Afghanistan, of course, stands out. The context of this question, though, is one in which the President of the United States, Barack Obama, has retreated clearly and publicly against having boots on the ground, as the American expression goes, in the Middle East. And one wonders whether the United Kingdom, and to a degree Germany, even though Germany has great sensitivities about fighting men and women in light of its own painful history, will the UK be forced to take a leadership position as these areas of conflict in the Middle East expand, widen, and intensify?
I think I have to be frank with you that it's quite difficult for a European country, even one such as the UK, to take a position of that forwardness in such a dangerous area of the world when the US is absent. I mean, we're accustomed to working with the US.
Mr. Blair worked with Mr. Bush.
That's right. And in many respects, inside US structures. I mean, the military, are like that. They put my hands together. They work inside each other's armed forces, not only just alongside each other. It's a mark of the man, I think, that he and the French president, of course, conducted the Libya operation, and that was clearly a European lead, was clearly Anglo-French lead. We got NATO in behind us. The Americans helped. The president wasn't particularly enthusiastic about doing so, but he did. I think that you can rely on the UK still to be willing to commit and to use force. We've just done so. I mean, there'll be an argument in the UK about what's happened with the using the drones, and the government is very clear. The right of self-defense permits this. This man was a danger to the country. We knew he was a danger to the country. We used force, and we will defend our right to do so. And I don't think there's any doubt that under Article 51 of the UN Charter, we were fully right to do so, and it was a proper thing to do. I think that there's a vote coming up, I hope in the UK Parliament, to rectify this curious non-decision really, of last year over Syria. It's a military nonsense, doesn't make political sense, but I have to be cautious because there's an election going on in the Labour Party at the moment for the leadership, and a rather left-wing leader who will be opposed may get in. So if the Labour Party then impose the whip and require their members to vote no, I think the government will wait in that case. Because the one thing the government is not going to do is court a second defeat.
Well, clearly one takes those very serious national domestic priorities into account when making these decisions.
Yes, you've got to have your people following you.
Yeah, you've got. So that's my next question. Has the British public followed? Has the message trickled down into the body politic about the dangers of international jihadism, the dangers to the UK, the dangers to the Western Alliance?
Yes, I think I can say with confidence, yes. And that is one of the factors behind the ability of the government in the end to impose what would otherwise be regarded as wholly unacceptable and unwanted restrictions on our liberties of various kinds. It's against that background that we have indeed instituted under law executive detention, which is an extraordinary step for a democracy to take. It's very, very small numbers of people. I mean, it's less
Executive
than two
detention permits up to...
It's an indefinite.
Indefinite.
No, it's up to 2 years. It's up to 2 years, things stand. And there's a move. I don't know if it'll succeed, actually, to toughen it again. But the conditions are tough. They're supervised by the courts, but this is a case of detaining people without trial. Why? Because we have evidence, but not of the kind that we can use in court.
It's suspicion. In other words, you're holding on suspicion.
Yes, that's right.
Probable cause. They might call it probable cause.
They call control orders, yes. So what I'm saying to you is that the UK has taken some really tough measures, of a kind that do really violate the principles that you stand for. We're very conscious of that. And we won't have it on the statute book for an instant longer than we have to, but we do regard it as being necessary as things stand at the moment. So, and there's public support behind that. So I think the British public are well aware. We have bitter experience with the IRA. International terrorism came along as extraordinarily bad news, but people understand the disciplines that terrorism imposes on society, and I think are prepared to stick it out.
It's extraordinary.
And we know it mustn't be allowed to win.
Well, one thinks back to the bombing of London and to the extraordinary resilience of the British people, having gotten through an impossible situation opposite the Nazi regime, and we know very well who's thriving and who is no longer here. Now, having said that, I want to ask another question from an Israeli point of view. For Israelis, London has become the heart and soul of incitement to genocide against Israelis of different groups, Muslim groups. There's Mr. al-Tamimi, and there's Sawalhe, who used to be the head of the West Bank command of the Hamas. He's now a supposed reformed, nonviolent, but inciter against for the destruction of Israel. One sees it on YouTube's. And there are other groups. There are many other groups, what they call BDS groups, boycott, divestment, sanction groups. And one wonders from here, is there any action that can be taken in terms of preaching genocide or preaching murder of Israel?
Yes. I mean, if there's evidence of that, we should be acting, because it's not legal. It's not legal to preach murder abroad's okay. That's
included in the prohibition.
Absolutely. Murder abroad's not okay. No.
So Israel.
So we ought to. No, I mean, we ought to. We ought. Prosecution. I mean, the evidence ought to be taken to the police, and prosecution should follow.
So that requires proactivity on the part of human rights or Jewish groups and on Israel. They should be active about
Absolutely, they should be. They should
That's
be,
a
and
nice
I would
message.
like them to be.
That's
I
a
don't
nice
want
message.
to see. I don't want to see the UK being a haven for that kind of propaganda. Because actually, if you get into the population as a whole in the UK, the level of anti-Semitism, I don't say it doesn't exist, but it's very low.
Yeah, I've actually heard that from Jewish and very delighted citizens of the UK. Here's a larger question for you as we move towards the end of our conversation, which has been really brilliant and eye-opening. This year's conference is called, its subtitle is The Shifting Sands of Terror. How do you see, Baroness, the sands of terror shifting this year from what it was last year?
There's been a gradual move, I suppose, over the last 2-3 years, but the sands have shifted, I think, from the kind of terrorism which you could almost call conventional under Al-Qaeda, under a structured organization that actually was interested in the big spectacular to be conducted against the far enemy, i.e. mostly the United States, but clearly also Europeans and particularly the
7/7, 7/7, 9/11.
7/7 and 9/11 are the big ones, obviously. In some ways, their pulling power has been outflanked. They're still active, but their pulling power, to some extent, at any rate in Western societies, has been outflanked by ISIL and Daesh, and their use of different media, different technique. At the moment, I would say that they're interested, obviously, in causing trouble and inspiring people in the UK and in other countries to go off and commit atrocities in the local community. But they're actually more interested, as things stand at the moment, in recruiting. I haven't any doubt. They get enough recruits, they will turn to us in a major way in due course. So I think that in some ways, the focus at the moment of terrorism is almost intra-Muslim communities. It's Sunni, Shia. One of the effects, which gives me some hope, of Muslims themselves becoming the very obvious object of terrorist intention, is that parents and Muslim families don't any longer feel this is nothing to do with us and it's all to do with Western foreign policy, because it's actually their children who are being taken.
Mm-hmm.
So
can they become allies then?
I very much hope they'll be active, because there is a shared enemy there, clearly. And so the sensible thing, obviously, is for the Muslim community and British leadership to come together. And there are good signs that parents are appealing to the police. They do realize that actually the state can help, and actually the state is a protector, and they need its help. So that's a good sign. What underlies that, I suppose, is the next stage, which is, okay, and what about your family structures? And what kind of opportunities do the Muslims have? And we need to look at what I was talking about earlier on, which is how they actually live, not separate lives, but lives which are fully mainstream in the UK. And nobody's suggesting that they shouldn't be Muslims. Nobody's suggesting they assimilate, but integrate. And at the same time, climb the tree like everyone else.
Be a proud Brit and a proud Muslim.
Exactly.
But be responsible.
Be responsible and be mainstream.
And be mainstream. That message, when you meet with your security counterparts in the EU, what's your sense? Are they holding the line? Are they as resilient as you seem to be in this conversation and let's say determined? Or does it spark some concern? I'm talking about the Belgians, I'm talking about the French and the Germans and the Italians and others.
I think we've been at this longer. And I think we've accepted the fact of multiracial, multi-faith. We don't go for multicultural. We go for single culture, but build a nation. And I think we've got to that point. I have a suspicion that the debate in many of our European counterpart countries hasn't got that far. And I don't think they see this yet as being not only a terrorist problem to be dealt with by the forces of law and order and intelligence, but is also a question of how you run a society.
Yeah, it's. Does one feel a greater sense of pessimism this year or optimism from a counterterrorism point of view? It sounds like on the one hand that MI5 and MI6 are doing what they need to be doing. They're cooperating. There's stability in the UK. There's a lot of terrorism prevention. But when we look, when we look here in the Middle East, one looks with an extraordinary level of concern at the vacuum of security, at the ability to metastasize terror and failed states, and the Islamic State seems on some level to have succeeded. What is your sense of it?
I would say I'm on the whole, glass is half empty at the moment. I think there's the glimmer of some hope about coming together on the domestic scene in the UK. But when I look round at first of all, the technical capabilities that our intelligence services need, where their margin of advantage has declined rather badly, and where we don't have the same degree of access to one of the main streams of communication and provocation and incitement, i.e. the social media. That's one thing, and that's bad. And secondly, as you rightly say, the spreading fire in the Middle East. Go around into North Africa. This is the European continent is ringed by volatility, instability, penetration of societies by terrorist and lawless forces, going right through to West Africa.
So in other words, the message
very concerning.
Yeah, keep one's eyes open and keep your foot on the gas and keep your eye on the ball.
That's right. Yeah, powder dry for the time being, but it may need to be used.
There we have it. The Right Honourable Baroness Pauline Neville-Jones, the former head of security, the Home Office, right? And today head of all cybersecurity for business in the UK, reporting directly to Prime Minister David Cameron. It's a great honour, Madam, to have you on the programme and to hear the view from the United Kingdom, extending all the way here to the Middle East and then back again to Europe. Thank you ever so much. We look forward to having you back again, God willing, on IDC International Radio right here from Herzliya, Israel.
Thank you very much.